Welcome to the Tucson Museum of Art. I'm Dr. Julie Sasse, the Chief Curator and Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art here. And I've been at the Tucson Museum of Art since 2000. So I've been here quite a long time and have organized many, many exhibitions over the years. In fact, I totaled it up recently and it's over 100. So I feel like I know the collection very, very well. I got to know Brad Kahlhamer when I first saw his work at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art when he did his exhibition, Let's Walk West. And I was so intrigued by a particular piece he did called Community Board that I followed his work for all those years. And when I was getting my PhD at the University of Arizona, I wrote about one of his pieces for a class I took on photography in the archive. And so my focus was on the community board, and I got to talk to him over the phone and get to know his work, and I became a big fan. So years later, lo and behold, I got a call from the front desk, and they said, there's a gentleman here by the name of Brad Kahlhamer to see you. And I got very excited and rushed over to greet him, and we started talking, and one thing led to another, and we decided it would be a great opportunity here to do an exhibition of his work. This show is 1159 to Tucson. The title of that show is based on the idea of the 310 to Yuma, a famous old 1950s Western that I think was remade in recent years. And so that is actually the time of his birth in Tucson. He was born to indigenous parents and was adopted as a baby into a family of German-American descent, or German descent. Wonderful couple from Wisconsin, actually, and they lived here outside of town. I think he had cousins in Marana, and his father was a spec home builder, so he got to play with construction tools and materials as a young child, and got to know the desert well. He played a lot with his cousins in Marana, and did everything from, chopping up cars to drive in the desert to ride his bicycle. And that's something that he still has a big love of, is riding his bicycle today. So he lived kind of an idyllic childhood. And then at some point when he was around 9 or 10, the family moved back to Wisconsin. And what's kind of cool about that is that's when he got to do even more hunting and fishing that he had already been doing with his dad. And it's kind of where he really started to realize that he didn't look like his parents, that he came from somewhere else. And that early awakening is what became the catalyst for his work today. When Brad and I started talking, we decided that the best thing to do would be a bit of a retrospective. So it's not a strict chronological overview, but it does hit on some of the key movements or eras or styles that he's gone through in his time. And of course, we had to have some of the old favorites and the piece that I had written about, so that was pretty exciting. So it took many years, and of course, COVID shut us down for a while, so we had to postpone. But finally, we got the show together, and it is quite extensive. One of the pieces that is very important is this early piece called Old Tucson, and of course, it's a little bit of a play on the old Tucson studios that was a big tourist attraction when he was young, and he had gone out there as a child. So that was pretty exciting. And what he's done here is he was invited at one point by the Swiss Institute in New York to create a response to another early explorer illustrator who had been looking at First Nations, Canada, Indigenous people, and some of the Midwest Indigenous people of the U.S. as he was on these expeditions. So it became a response to that, and other Indigenous people were invited. So how did he get from, say, the backwoods of Mayfield, Wisconsin, after leaving Tucson, to being one of the biggest rising stars in New York? Well, after school, he had gone to school at the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. He and a buddy said, we need to go east. And they picked Boston at first because they wanted something that they thought was small enough that it could be handleable for them. And they broke down somewhere on the way and decided, well, New York made more sense. So that's where he ended up in New York, I think in the late 70s after he had finished school. And during the time he was in high school, he really got interested in Wisconsin in rock bands. So he's always had a music base or a music theme running through his work, and he continues to perform today. But once he got into New York, he started to perform in a local band. They played at CBGB's. I mean, it was part of the underground scene. But very specifically, he got a job at Topps Chewing Gum, the company that did those kinds of baseball trading cards with the gum and that kind of material. And he was hired by the famous cartoon artist Art Spiegelman, the one who had created the famous Pulitzer Prize-winning book Mouse, the cartoon series about the Holocaust and his father. And he got to meet all these underground comic artists and was part of this underground scene. And that's how a lot of his work has this kind of a graffiti meets punk art meets abstract expressionism, because he was melding all of these inspirations. And then as his early identity as an indigenous artist was more revealed to him, he began searching. And he calls this search for his roots Yonderings. And what you'll see here is this kind of a different style, a different visitation of various tribes, because he knows that he won't be able to find out his actual tribal heritage. But to him, it's more important to discuss the idea of the openness of this search. And in the search, he's discovered wonderful people, wonderful artists, wonderful connections, and that's what you'll see. So for instance, you'll see a figure of an indigenous person with perhaps a buffalo headdress on with the horns, and you'll see cross forms, you'll see teepee forms, or perhaps stylistic design elements from, say, Navajo blankets. He knows he's melding multicultural elements, sometimes even Northwest Coast, but he is trying to look at it from a bigger picture rather than saying, I'm this tribe, I represent this nation. He calls this nation that he developed, this tribe of people that he socialized with in New York, the Bowery Nation. So of course there's no such thing, it's all fictional, but it's part of how he looks at the world. He has different levels, first level, second level, third level. And the first level is, say, the way he grew up in Tucson from indigenous parents and his early life in Wisconsin, the idea of being in an adoptive family. The second would be his second life in New York. And the third is the art itself and the new connections he's made with indigenous people. And there's many things written about these different levels that he expresses. Sometimes they change in interpretation, but it's pretty much different phases of his life. Why don't we take a look over here at the Skull Project? Like I said, I was very interested in the idea of the community board, which is multiple elements, but then after he had done that one, which we'll see in a minute, he had done Skull Project, and he loves skulls, and he doesn't see them as like the Day of the Dead, about honoring the dead. He admits that he loves the image of the skull. He loves the ominous overtones. It's not necessarily a happy thing, but he just loves the sinister qualities of that. And interestingly, he didn't pull it from Day of the Dead after having been in Tucson, of course, exposed to that kind of culture. But he discovered it when he had gone to Italy as an adult and saw the catacombs and saw the rows of skulls. So he was intrigued by the imagery. So this one is that idea, and it's, you know, some of it's humorous, some of it makes reference to Arizona. Other things make reference over and over again in his work to his time at Topps Chewing Gum Company. So here's an example of this cacophonous mishmash of images, and he also is inspired by sketchbooks. So in a way, these sort of look like pages from his sketchbooks, and we'll see those in a minute. There was a very set way to do it. I think his original intention was that it could be very much spontaneous, but this one is owned by someone else, and so there are sort of protocols in making sure that it at least maintains its original integrity. So yes, we had it photographed, or it was documented well, and so it was blown up big and cut into sections, and then we had massive tables set up where we had to search through packets. It might have said left corner, but in general it was, can I find a sinister skull in purple that's on a black background. And then we found out there were like 20 of them in there, but all sinister skulls, of course. So we had a fun time with that, laughing about, okay, I'm looking for a sinister skull. Well, it's there. They're all there.
How long did it take you to put this together?
This was, and mind you, I didn't do it myself, but I helped select. But with a preparator, it took a day and a half of 8 hours a day. So it was quite extensive. And then we have, I think, 3 pieces that are multiple elements where they're all just put in with pins. But this one, I think, is the biggest one that we have in the show. Here's an example of one of the earlier styles when he's much more abstract expressionist in tone. This is one from 1998. He had a pivotal thing that happened to him. Of course, I mentioned his background with music. But at some point, he was getting into a lot of the alternative shows, a lot of the early emerging artist spaces like exit art and things like that. And so he was starting at first working with rubber tires and doing big installation art. But over time, he started to do more painting. And when he started to do some of his early painting, which I can show some other examples of, Jeffrey Deitch projects noticed his work, and they really were the first champion, so to speak, of him in a way that documented him with a catalog. So he was on the scene with some of the rising stars of this new interest in artists that had prior to that time been marginalized, indigenous artists, people of color, artists of color. And so he was showing with Leonardo Drew and Mark Dion and people that were the up-and-coming artists of their time. So that really changed things for him, and he got included in a lot of things from residencies to big exhibitions. But usually it was through big group shows where he was placed with these other important people, and then his first big solo show at Deitch Projects. So this kind of work was documented well. Another one from 1998. You can see very fluid, very biomorphic, still a sense of playfulness. It looks like kind of a sinister pumpkin form here. So he tells a story. They're all kind of narrative based, but there's no in particular theme. But here you can see a little bit of a cactus form, not quite a saguaro, lettering, another image of a cactus. So he keeps going back to his roots. So that's another reason why it was a natural to be here, because he was coming out now for longer stays and working with his sketchbooks and getting subject matter.
So was he happy with the exhibit?
Yeah, he came in a lot, and I got to meet his father, who was just adorable. Here's some later works. Now, these are from 2013 to around 2015. Notice how different that is from what we just saw. Now he's using stencils, and he's using text stencils. And notice this Bowery Nation that I was talking about. There is no such thing. The Bowery is a section of New York, a gritty, maybe it's cleaned up now, but at the time it was a gritty part of New York. And so it's United States Indian Band. So this is his new tribe. It's not an indigenous tribe. It's a group of like-minded people that love music, that love art, that are living maybe a little more fringe than many other artists. We were able to borrow some wonderful pieces from other museums. We have one on view from the Denver Art Museum, one from the Phoenix Art Museum, and then, of course, I'll show you in a minute a piece that we bought for the Tucson Museum of Art. So that's pretty exciting to be able to do that. Here's another example. Here are style changes again. This is also from 2013. So while he was doing the stencil works, you can see that it's almost getting not so abstract expressionist and abstract, but it's kind of getting more fluid. It's working into something wholly different. So here you see kind of a snake-like form, and there's stenciling happening, but there's also just big jumbles of paint and more fluid things. It's almost like something that's underwater, and it's starting to just melt. But notice up there at the top, braid my hair. So he's making references to perhaps an urban indigenous culture. And he has long hair, and at many times he braids it. So it's kind of a reference to his life and his contemporary urban culture that he's a part of. And here again is another example of yet other influences. So he's doing the text still. He's got the more abstract kind of expressive brush strokes, but now this is from a year later from the one we just saw from 2016, but he superimposed all these rather stylistic and kind of traditional Northwest Coast symbols. And a lot of times that happens when he is at a residency or giving a talk, but he also has just traveled either at the invitation of indigenous elders or on his own. And in this case, I think he did go up to Sitka, Alaska, so it was probably influenced by that experience when he had encountered new images and symbols. So when he's doing these things, you know, a lot of people have issues with appropriation, but he's very unabashed about what he's doing with appropriation. He's not saying, I'm from this tribe doing this kind of work as part of my cultural heritage. He is admitting that he is influenced by all of his travels. And I likened it in my essay in the book that we produced to the Parisian flaneur. You know, he lets his muse take him to the next place, the next group of people, and it's a way of connecting. So it's a very positive thing. It's not about, I'm taking this imagery so I can capitalize on it. He's more admitting, I'm the visitor, I'm exploring, I'm trying to find out, you know, who I am through my visits. Here's another example. When you see all these images, these are called next level figures. And he was inspired by visiting the Heard Museum. Sometime around the time he was in college in Wisconsin, he went out with a buddy and he wanted to show him where he came from, so Arizona. So he was down here visiting in Tucson, he went to Phoenix, and he became very intrigued by the collection of katsinas at the Heard Museum from the Barry Goldwater collection. He does not say these are katsinas. He's making that very clear that he's not trying to appropriate that. He's only inspired by what he saw, the idea that something could represent spirituality of some kind. So, you know, we actually talked to Hopi elders to make sure that this would be in no way any kind of an affront. And they all said as long as it's done respectfully and honestly, then that had their blessing. So we made sure to make that distinction very clear that he is admitting influences but not representing any one group. Now this is the piece that I had been inspired by at the community board, and what I liked about it is how expansive it was, how big, and the influences that he has. And of course, the class I took was about the photography and the archive, but he's not the photographer. Perhaps some of the ones are from his road trips, but they're not meant to be, you know, the classic traditional photographer. These are about the way we live today, the way we take our photos through a cell phone, through, you know, the driving on his way to one of his yanderings. That's what he sees through the car. Or photographs of friends out at clubs. I mean, he admits that he's part of a club scene. And of course, when you're playing at CBGB's and still performing, that's part of the culture that you're enmeshed in. But what I find really kind of endearing is that he includes Degrassia reproductions. And why would he do that? Well, he grew up in Tucson, and so in his house, that was something very important in the late 50s, early 60s, was Degrassia reproductions. That's what everybody had, a Cocopelli in the front yard and Degrassia inside. And so he actually likes Degrassia because that was familiar. That's the first time he encountered art of any kind. So you see some of that, some of his drawings of some of, you know, what you would call his, you know, posse of friends, and various places that he's gone. Now here's Fort Gotham Indian Princess. Well, I said, now tell me about the Fort Gotham tribe, thinking it was like we have, you know, lots of forts around here, Fort McDowell, whatever. And he said, get it, Julie, it's Fort Gotham, it's New York, it's made up, it's part of my story, the narrative. And so I go, oh, Fort Gotham, now I get it. So it took me a while to not take everything he says so literally. But you're seeing basically his life. Here's an example of an image of him, and I don't know all the people that he's with, but it's everything from poets to artists to singers to important to people in various tribes, and just friends from hanging out in the Bowery or other places around New York. But you can see it's like a snapshot of his life. Here he obviously was attending a sporting event of some kind. So here he is performing music, and he brought out, during the run of our early part of the show, he brought out his violinist, and they performed at Hotel Congress, which was a huge treat. but you can see people that were his models. So it's this wonderful thing. And here, Lakota Thrifty Mart, when he was on one of these travel trips to discover various tribal places, that was really the logo of the Thrifty Mart. So that became a repeating part of his work. And such things as, of course, American Spirit, cigarettes. So he's looking at how we have commercialized indigenous art and indigenous culture, how much we've appropriated, and then, of course, his own bona fide connection, and then his own ability as an artist to pull from all these sources, as long as it comes from a, an authentic place. So he's very careful to explain that in his work. But to me, this is an archive of his life, and that's why I picked it, to write an essay about. You're seeing, friends and family, and a little piece of buffalo hide, probably picked up when he went to South Dakota to see a Sundance ceremony. This one I think is charming. Gila Monster Superstitions 32504. So he went on a hike, and oftentimes in the course of working with him, he would text me and show me where he was, or show me a page out of his sketchbook. And these are things that he's encountering along the way. And so you're right, it's artistically and entertainingly put together to, kind of show the joy he finds in life.
It's great, every picture has a story.
It really does. And there you see, obviously on display at another location, maybe his studio, but he's shown this one. This is the old Tucson that we have here on display in our exhibition. Now, at some point, his parents moved back to Arizona, or in Arizona in Mesa, and got a winter residence. And then over time, he would go there, especially after 9/11. He spent more time, and that was the inspiration for the show that he had done at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art, working in his parents' backyard. And he loves the spontaneous kind of setting up tables and working in a backyard. We talked about getting a studio for him, and he ultimately turned down this beautiful big studio out by the freeway so he could work. And he said, no, I want to be down in the heart of the city, and I want to be in this great bungalow house from the 30s that he was staying in. And he said, I'm going to work in the backyard. And I said, oh no, here we go. And he did his whole show in New York in that backyard. Now here's some of the sketchbooks that I was talking about. He's got over 250 of these. And so the issue, of course, with me as a curator is we can't show every page. So we had to open it up to one good representation. But every page is filled with a different site or a different place he's been. So he documents his life, constantly sketching, constantly painting in these, for the most part, similar sized moleskin blank books that can be used for everything from diaries to travelogues to you name it. But he uses them for continually creating art. And he calls it his nomadic studio. And there's another piece that we can see when we go into the next gallery that shows how expansive that idea of the nomadic studio goes, because he started to paint on bed sheets. Now here's another example. This one is back from 1997. So you can see that earlier style where a little bit more abexy, and yet text is here, but it's not as rigid. He's not using spray paint or aerosol. He's using just pure painted form. And again, a reference to the desert. The kind of, now this one looks a little comical. It's not so scary looking. So thin, dead figure, and then a date or a time stamp, so to speak. He loves to mix these references to the desert, to time, to place, and then the skull. I can't help but wonder if the skull isn't, just that's representative in that piece at least of him. Now this is one that came from, if I'm not mistaken, the Phoenix Art Museum, borrowed from them. And again, they're almost adorable. Some of the, here's one that says kitty, and it's just smiley, like a smiley face, or almost like balloons or balloon bubbles, yet then we have a kind of a sinister clown skull. So he has a great deal of fun with his imagery. Here's one little boy, fat kid. Now, this one I think is all happy with a fat kid. And I think fat kid might have been the name of somebody, everybody had a nickname. And so there's Ugg Junior, Ugg Senior, Fat Kid. So, oh, here's a lovely skull with a tongue sticking out, or a cow with the horns. So everything is part of this narrative that he continues. You know, it's, to me, it's just cacophonous, but in a way that's not threatening, even though some of them can look rather sinister. But who can deny the cuteness of that kitty image? So yeah, he has fun with his images. Now the Ugg image, which I can show you as we go further down, that came about when he moved back to Wisconsin, and his fellow high school classmates kind of taunted him. There was a homeless man who was coming through town. And there are a lot of indigenous people in that particular area. I don't recall exactly what tribe, but it is a very authentic area of indigenous occupation, of course. And so the kids are taunting him and said, hey, your cousin's in town, or your brother's in town, or your dad's in town. They just gave him a hard time because the gentleman looked very indigenous. And you know, he could have taken offense to it and been hurt by the taunting, but he looked at the guy and he said, oh, he does look like me. And so it's very interesting. He decided, and they called him in a very slanderous way, Ugg. And so instead of having it be a thing of hurtful shame, he took it on as a badge of honor, and he became Ugg Junior. And so Ugg Junior, Ugg Senior's other elders that he's met, where he actually, so he's not putting them down, he's saying, I own this. Now this one's from the Denver Art Museum, and here's another example of a different style. Now we're looking at the idea of what's called staffage, where at the turn of the century, a lot of paintings or illustrations, they created this oval as if it's an eye into a scene rather than the whole scene itself. And then kind of various things happen around it. This is a typical painting trope. And so when he did his, look at the wild creature here. It's something that is half skull, half animal, and then skulls abound, but then there's a hawk, and sometimes he'll have eagles, and it looks like a scene from the Superstitions. But all along the way, it's almost like a map where he's writing little things as if he's telling somebody what to look out for. So here, young girl blacktails, stay on the path, stay on marked trails, I'm big and hairy and could hurt you, sharp teeth, with new porcelain caps. So he is, each one of these has to be him, because he's saying here, Aquarius, afraid of girls' moons. So again, he is going into very fantastical territory, going up the hill. This one I can't say out loud. Go by yourself, oh, exclamative. So there's lots of things that it's almost like he is offering this to someone else as their roadmap. And here, could kill for food. In a way, I look at this, and this was done in 2002. I can't help but wonder if this wasn't a reactionary piece to 9/11. You know, it's full of anxiety about the trepidation of being out in the desert. And notice what's happening here. Do you see these squares with speakers? He became very interested in an atonal sound artist by the name of Glenn Braca, and he became very fascinated with this loud, cacophonous music. So this is an example of like going to a rock concert and having that music just blast through the open air. And so you'll see that a lot. And in some of his early work, he actually used old discarded speaker funnels, the black paper, and did large-scale assemblages with those. So all of this feeds into it, his interest in music, his interest in the desert, his interest in symbols of the West, and then, of course, his own kind of autobiographical take on all of that. That's a new one. You can see here Bear Butte. That's an area in South Dakota. I think there's a lot of controversy over the environment with that. But you can see how his work, that's a more recent piece, so it's definitely changed again in terms of how he paints. Here's an example of the bed sheet, the nomadic studio that I had mentioned. And this one is called American Horse. This is actually painted on a bed sheet. And here you can see the use of stencils and airbrushing, but also watercolor on a bed sheet. And you're seeing combinations of everything here. You're seeing Plains Indian symbols. You're seeing Northwest Coast and the indigenous woman's eyes. And interestingly, this was purchased while we were doing our organizing from the Horseman Foundation. And I thought maybe it was a foundation that only showed horse imagery or something about the horse, but it turns out it's John Horseman. That's his name, and he has a foundation and collects art in St. Louis. So they have a wide range of wonderful contemporary art. So they stopped by to see us and got to see their piece on display. But there you see again the Lakota Thrifty Mart. Oftentimes you'll see tops re-entering the scene. Still text, everything from old movies, old westerns. Again, the little private mentions and storylines, and all of this just comes from his travels, his imagination, from the movies. It's quite amazing. Some figures are all fallen over because what he's doing is he's responding to a scene from Rindisbacher. And I don't know if they were the victims of a massacre or if they were victims of a disease of some kind. But the people are all down. There's a couple of standing figures. But for the most part, it's a rather bleak scene. It looks like, with of course a lot of the use of birch, that it's a woodland area. But we've heard a lot of stories about hardships of lack of food or disease or famine in many of these forts. Where people are just all trying to struggle to survive together. But I think this was a specific scene in Rindisbacher's observations of some kind of strife, of course.
So when you did this exhibit, you had to do it the same way. You had a photograph,
Yeah,
and you
yeah,
had to place the figures exactly.
Yeah, and he came, he did. It's so funny. Some of the pieces look so haphazard. They look very random and very just thrown together. But when he came here, every braid was re-altered to be exactly how he wanted it, or a ribbon. I mean, he sees this very seriously. It's not, oh, just throw it up anyway. He has a very specific way. As much as it looks casual and kind of spontaneous, it's very calculated.
So does he actually get in there and actually make the changes himself? Or
He did while we walked through. He didn't, sometimes I always invite the artist to be a part of the installations if that's of interest to them, and of course ensure them that we can certainly do it without their help. But he liked the idea of us installing it, and then he'd come in and put final tweaks on it, and so that was nice. So all he did was make sure that everything was right in the way it appeared. It's not my day job, but I'm an artist too, and I think it's great to include them. It's part of the process, and I honor artists and their ideas. So it's not for me to say, I know how it best represents, but we talked constantly about, should it be chronological and the uniqueness of our space. It doesn't always work that way, but we kind of like the idea of throwing up thematic areas or stylistic areas and show how things kind of inform each other rather than having it say, this happened then, because he goes back to these tropes or these styles.
Determine which ones would be exhibited next to each other? I mean, how do you determine the layout, and how different is the true exhibit from what it looks like on paper?
Well, you never know, and that's why there's a lot of changes at the last minute. My last show before this, we didn't measure, or we just didn't realize the scale of works, and we were short by 4 inches, and we had to completely rethink the whole exhibition because we simply couldn't make more wall space, and the paintings would not fit. So we had to rethink. This one, as you can see how high up that got, we were pushing our luck to the very inch, and yet there's no other ceiling that high and that wide. So with our space, we don't have the luxury always of saying exactly where we would have everything, but I wanted one big installation in each gallery rather than have them side by side. So that was one criteria, splitting them up so that they could have a nice representation in each space. And then we had to think about the obvious situations that we can't get away from, which is everything from fire alarms to signage. In this case, we had to move all of our signage up to accommodate this and the last exhibition because the scale is so big. So a lot of times we have something that other people don't have to worry about, which is a big section of our galleries goes down a ramp. We have a rhomboidal spiraling down system of galleries, and so we have to always consider our environment as well as the artist and the art.
Do you have a software program that you use?
I'm a butcher block paper person. I mean, I have big sheets of paper and lots of small thumbnail prints, and then a lot of coming in and staring at the space. But after 100 shows, I kind of know the space. Although sometimes, like I said, recently, I surprised myself and as did the artist when we realized we were off by a little. So no, nothing's by chance, but sometimes, no matter how much you think you have a feel for the work, you get there and go, nope, that piece needs to go over here, or this piece needs to be over there.
So do you consider the dramatic effect, like when someone walks in, you know, what they see?
Yes, always, yeah. Because I know when I walk in, the first thing I do is cast my eyes. And that's the benefit of this space is, you know, there are no surprises, but there's also this grand view that other places don't have. So we may not have more wall space, but what we have is you can go, oh my God, that's fabulous. I have to go down there. Or oftentimes when I'm making selections, the biggest pieces go here where I have the highest ceilings, or I want the biggest impact. So we oftentimes have things that we know will draw people down. So the smaller ones might end up on the ramp or around a corner, or if they're sensitive material, of course, because I'm mindful that we have children coming through. And so we still display it, but with a little bit of a courtesy. So yeah, now here's another one where we have this bank of this one's from 1999, this bank of speakers. Again, the happy, scary, pumpkin skeleton person who knows what it is. There's the ubiquitous saguaro, the faces that look like they're hanging from a thread, but who knows? So we don't know if they're just symbols or if he's talking here about something that happened to them. Again, there's your javelina, the landscape. I mean, he clearly adores the desert, the Sonoran Desert, because he keeps bringing up these images that only you can find in this region. This is Ugg. So this is one of the first, I think, I think he'd been doing it for a long time, but this is an example anyway of him making reference to Ugg, the drifter who was, or homeless person who was in Mayfield, Wisconsin. Not everybody knew what that meant, and there was a show in Germany when it came back, they had changed the title to VGU. They didn't understand what Ugg meant. So I said, did you ever do one that was VGU? No, it's Ugg. Here's one, floating muskie. I mean, I love that. I'm from Wisconsin too, so I know all about muskies and fishing in that region. So he, oftentimes some of the elements that he used in his next level figures came from when he was out fishing. And he'd fish on the Hudson River, he'd fish all over in New York, but also, of course, he grew up fishing here, in the White Mountains, etc., but also in Wisconsin. So I knew all about the Horican flyway because my dad was a Canada goose hunter, and so a lot of the stories he told, I was like, I know this land, this people. So he doesn't take away anything where I had to leave here. It's more of I'm going there. It's about this adventure he's on, this international adventure. Everything's a chance to meet people, a chance to play music, a chance to paint or sketch. We commissioned the famous Natalie Diaz. She just won, I think, the Pulitzer Prize, or she was a MacArthur Fellow for sure, to respond to his work in a poem. And so that's here, and we're just thrilled that she would participate in this with us. And he really wanted an Indigenous poet to be part of the catalog, and so this is referring to his work. And of course, everything we do, we translate into Spanish. So we decided 2 long scrolls was the best way to do that. I like this, America, haunted shore, little giant cemetery of braids. So she's picking up on some of his symbols. So again, very thoughtful. This is some of the latest work that he had done. He had been looking at the souvenir, ubiquitous in shops around the Southwest, of the dream catcher. And I defy anyone to, deny that they don't have a little dream catcher tucked away somewhere. And what he did is he started to play with wire, and he did a dream catcher or two. And then, as is kind of becoming a bit of a trend with some indigenous artists, he made one large, and he called it the super catcher. And in a way, it sort of has a little bit of an influence from those banks of speakers, how they're emitting all this amazing, powerful sound. He says to him, it is all the dream catchers in the world brought together in a new cosmos of super catcher. So meaning the receptor for all good spirits to come through to this larger. Now this one's a small one in comparison. Some are 10 feet wide. I wanted to make sure we could get it through the door. So we picked a smaller one, but that's very classic for him. He's done flag shapes, he's done, as you saw earlier, chandeliers, and now we're seeing more and more of the super catchers. So notice how the light, the shadow plays on the wall. So he's been doing a lot of these, and then he's using the bells and the jingles, all elements in dancing and regalia and various indigenous tribal dances. So that's a common material these days, but he's making it his own. And by making it big and by changing the basic premise of it, he says that what he's doing is taking it away from a white tourist commodity to bringing it back to its original intent. And of course, I had to do my homework too, and found that the dream catchers really had a spiritual origin. It wasn't made for tourists. It was, I won't say appropriated, but offered up as a tourist item. And it's his way of saying, I'm taking it back. This is the one we acquired for our collection. And this one is not a bed sheet, but it's a canvas tarp. And this is the one where, jokingly, we had the laugh on me with the Fort Gotham Girls and Boys Club, because I just assumed that there really was a Girls and Boys Club, but it was his way of talking about this, fictional tribe that he's created, the Fort Gotham Girls and Boys Club. It's his people hanging out, his musician friends, his models, various clubby people. But also he has 22773 at the bottom. And the 22773 refers to the second Wounded Knee occupation. And that's when 200 Oglala Lakota and followers of the American Indian movement seized and occupied the town of Wounded Knee. I used to like to write volumes because I wanted people to understand how important the work was. So every piece had a major essay. Of course, I'm the curator, I'm not the educator, and the educator knows the tolerance level for people's attention. And of course, for me, every scrap of text I'm poring over because I'm from a scholar base, not just a general, I'd like to know more about it. So I had to learn more about my audience instead of just my own interest in the material. And so we have a wonderful director of community engagement and inclusion and diversity, and she has standards, and they've learned this through education and through coursework and conferences. So they know about how many words is the tolerance level where you would lose people otherwise. So we actually have some guidelines, and then I always pass my writing on to the diversity director and inclusivity manager, so to speak. And then she might tell me where, maybe as a general reader, I might have lost them. So in a way, it's been a good experience for me. And now I think there's a lot of times where she doesn't edit me so much because I'm learning, which is great.
Which
but,
is a lot of it's just taking out
right.
extraneous information.
It is.
It's
like
brief.
Cut to the chase.
Yeah,
Don't say gossamer wing. Say translucent. Okay, I got it. I get. We all like to show off our big words. Right. But anyway, so yes. So which ones get attention? I think we try to pick the ones that the people would go, what? What's going on here the most? Or the ones that need some kind of interpretation, or they might avoid it, Sometimes there's pieces that really just don't need it because there's not a particular narrative or a particular interpretation that needs special attention, but maybe something that introduces a type of art, and then when you go to the next one of that era or that style, you've already learned something. Or you'll run into it later and go, oh, that explains the one I just saw. So I think it's like a third of the work is the max, and sometimes we do what's called section texts that talk about a grouping of work. So everything's kind of different depending on the space and what we're trying to say. The last thing we want is for people to feel like, I don't get it, I don't relate to it, and I'm not coming back. We want people to understand it. This is not the gatekeepers of only the special people should know about this. We're excited. We want people to know what the artist is doing and to share what we've discovered. So that's why it's helpful to have this special person, Dr. Mariana Pegno, here to help us to find those inroads. So sometimes it's a video, sometimes it's an Instagram post. Even oldsters like me can learn new tricks. I'm constantly on Instagram now, checking out artists or other museums. And if that's what they're looking at, that's the way to find people. And then when they come in, to embrace their experience, post them looking at the art. That's one of the jobs of the curator, is to be always on the lookout, to be always engaged, to always be looking. Every time I travel anywhere, I'm checking out museums or looking for potential studio visits. Certainly people are encouraged to meet me or to engage with me. Oftentimes I can't get back to everybody, but people have reached out to me. I reach out to them. I do a lot of travel trips with our Contemporary Art Society, and we're always looking at studios. So it's kind of goes both ways. We have a wonderful Arizona Biennial, and the Arizona Biennial brings in sometimes 500 artists who apply, and I make sure to see every one of those works. And I don't do the selecting, but I'm watching, I'm saving, I'm making notes, and then I'm happy to share that good fortune of that database with any other curators who are looking for specific artists for their exhibitions. So I think that's one of the biggest bonuses for me, because I can't just be traveling around the state or the country looking. We have many, many other things that we have to do. A lot of it is internet searching, and now Instagram. I mean, it's like growing by the week how many artists I follow and then follow me. We've always known what our collection was, but we really wanted to codify it. And recently we've been working on a collections plan. And the plan is something that we started and then stopped. We wanted to be absolutely sure that we stood behind what we wanted to collect. And of course, we're very, very in tune with the IDEA principles: inclusivity, diversity, equity, accessibility. And so accessible meaning every kind of accessibility, from the barrier with translations to the physical environment. So trying to make sure that we hit these principles. And it's been a wonderful thing for us. So one of the things that we are totally embracing is the idea of adding more to our collection of indigenous artists, of Black artists, of artists of color in general, artists from the LGBTQ plus community. So we are becoming much more free to be open-minded. We were always open-minded, but we didn't always have quite the cultural permission to move forward as fast as we are. And so it's been exciting, because we finally are getting a chance to do what the curators wanted to do all along: more women artists. I mean, we were truly deficit in many ways. So we have lots of fun areas to grow. And here's an example. This is selections from our permanent collection. You see here a work by Patrick Martinez, a Los Angeles artist. He addresses his indigenous roots as a Latinx artist, but with indigenous roots, in something that sort of reflects a certain part of Los Angeles, but also his cultural history. And then Enrique Martinez Celaya, the bronze sculpture, a very poetic, rather literary, introspective look at the world around him. And then we have a wonderful temporary loan of Sterling Ruby, a very well-known artist who shows quite a bit in Los Angeles, and he works with aerosol paint. So it's a big mix. We have Sam Fresquez and in partnership with another artist by the name of Marin Omataya Olaka, and together they have made this series of works. You can see that there's a reference to Marin's, the African American hairstyles, and so together it's like a tassel, a decorative object, but it's also kind of reminiscence of hairstyles. So more women artists, more artists from Latin American art, Herrera over there. So many, many things. And if we go around the corner, you'll see even more, so it's pretty exciting. These are all things we've acquired within the last couple of years. Of course, we continue to build our collection in every way, more historic materials. Over here we have some new pieces. Angela Ellsworth, who's responding to her heritage from a Mormon family. And then we have Jack Bayless, who's reflecting on his queer identity and the idea of the male gaze. We're having work by Laura Spalding Best, where she's looking at everything from environmental issues, painting on what it appears to be ironing boards. So she's blending feminist issues with the environmental issues. We have a number of indigenous artists from outside of the area. Vanessa German, who's responding to the changes in how commercial branding has been changed. So here she has Aunt Jemima retires. She's declaring, yes, it's over now. So it's a happiness. We hold these truths to be self-evident. So Vanessa German doesn't live in this area, but she is a black artist, a woman artist, a performance artist, and we now have all kinds of support from donors and funders and encouraging us and enabling us to kind of beef up our collection in profound ways, so very exciting. We have some gems in our collection. We don't always have full, filled-in encyclopedic works, but we have some very important works in the collection, like Arthur Dove, Marston Hartley. Well, and especially because of COVID, we had things that were planned for 2 years and working on it and then had to stop. So I think we first started talking about the Brad Kahlhamer show in 2016. But of course, I've been researching him since 2003 or 4. So, it takes, like a lot of people say about a painting, why is that worth so much? It took you 10 minutes to do, but it took a lifetime to get to the point to do that painting. So the same thing with curators. Every degree I got, every class I took, every experience informs the next thing I do. So I have shows that I never got to realize yet, but I'm still hoping or waiting and keeping them in a file. And in the meantime, other shows might get going. So we have always something in the ready, something in the dream state, and something in the actually working on it state.
So how much of a curator's job is preparation and planning? Because it seems like this would be great fun trying to figure out where all the pieces are going.
Yeah, that's this part of it, yeah. Of course, it's the most fun. And the opening night, when you get to show off, you're part of the celebration because you're just as proud. Look what I found, or look what I got to, look who I got to work with. Look at what I want to show you. This is who I wanted you to learn about because I think he's fabulous or she's fabulous. So you get to bask in a little of the glory, but really by the time you've launched it, it's like artist birth, or they say it's like birthing a baby. It's out in the world then, and you go on to the next. And it's like theater productions. Once it's out there, or the wrap, you're on to the next one already. So I'm not here in the galleries as much. It's not like I visited every day because I'm busy doing 4 more shows that open in 2 months. So you have to allow it to get out in the world and grow up on its own. Well, the funny thing is what I didn't know is how much math you have to learn, how much you have to really learn to be a good writer. So what I would say is anybody who wants to be a curator, please, please see if you really love art and the history of art, because you have to have a reverence for what came before in order to be informed about what's happening today and what's going to happen. So it's a total investment of research. You don't just stop at 5 and forget about it. So do your homework. Math, why do I need math? Because You have to make sure you don't do what I did that last show where it didn't fit on the walls, that you don't ship out 20 pieces that you didn't need, because you're going to pay for the crating and shipping. So you have to prepare budgets, you have to write grants. All that takes understanding of how to construct a narrative, how to tell your story, tell it well, because you're competing with other people who are taking the time to be better writers, to pay attention to their budgets better. And so you have to do it to make your job more effective. So if somebody wants to be a curator, I suggest really taking all the classes you can. Don't rush through. Learn basic business principles. Take a business 101. Take a writing class. And then, of course, art history like crazy. And maybe take some art classes so you understand what an artist goes through. The fact that I have an MFA in art, in studio art, I can't tell you how many times it served me well, because I never dismiss anybody's struggle in the studio or the nuance of their technique, because I do get it from the artist's perspective. So I think taking classes to understand what an artist goes through, you can find out it's not as easy as it might appear. That's why they make it look easy, like an ice skater. It takes a lot of practice. So I would think the next thing I would tell somebody who wants to be in the business, volunteer at first. You can't expect to get a big job right out of school. Aim high to the biggest, best schools you can find your way into, number one. But then if you can't get a job right away, volunteer. Do a postdoc, volunteer at a local nonprofit, and offer to do a show. Even if you do it for free, just get your foot in the door by proving you know how to create a narrative, know how to find artists and get them coordinated to be able to show something. And then it can start kind of building from there. There are nonprofits where they welcome you to apply for a visiting curator situation. And so we've got the internet now. It's so much easier to find opportunities and then keep looking for that chance.
Because it seems like a lot of being a curator, you're really a storyteller. I mean, you're displaying items in a certain particular way. And
Yes.
You're telling a story.
The artist does the visual language. They're the visual storyteller. We're here to be the interpreter or to be the presenter. You know, that's our job. We aren't the artist. We shouldn't pretend to be, and we shouldn't pretend to be their voice. But if one does their job right, they are working in tandem with the artist, or at least with the artist's legacy, by researching and interviewing to be sure that it's being presented in a way that not only honors the artist and the artist's intent, but also what we might help to expand on that understanding through our knowledge of how everything is linked to each other, to tell maybe even a different narrative. For instance, with art that maybe came before the last 20 years or so, to understand perhaps the political context in which it was made, but then to suggest another way of looking at the material that's more sensitive to people today. Today, people are very involved with that, of finding ways of having the art matter, having people's voices matter. And so through the art, one can do that. Now, of course, not all art is political. A lot of it is not social activism, but there's enough threads of what they do that curators and educators can work to place them in time and place, and how perhaps they do fit in to the issues of the day. So not every single piece is going to be about abortion rights or about the struggle of the marginalized, but in proper context it can be either about those things just by explaining its time and place, and how it might be an antidote or a perhaps a mental break from those kinds of things, or how maybe it's an abstract painting and it's all one color, but that one color might be very indicative of something that's happening in the world today. So we find the threads so that people can go, I get it and I relate. Well, we've done everything from audio recordings to QR codes in the past, and we'll continue to seek out ways that people find it a more enjoyable experience. We are doing a search for a new director, so we're looking forward to seeing where that new movement will be in the future. Of course, we look to the director for all kinds of expansion of ideas, artistic vision, strength of the museum, and so we're pretty excited about that. We're looking forward to the future, but we're letting the community inform us even more. What do you need to make this your community, your state, your region's museum? What can we do to constantly do a better job to not only do right by the art for the area, but the people of the area to enjoy the world around them through art? But I think there's a much more enhanced awareness of what art can do for people and what art is saying about the world around us. So I think before there might have been a little bit of, we want to instruct you about a certain society, and this is what, cultured society does and looks at. But if you look at a lot of the work that was painted back in different eras, they were looking at the reality of social struggles. They were looking oftentimes at class differences. So it's not always out with the bad, in with the new. But I think we're doing it with much more of a consciousness and a purpose. I haven't been here for over 22 years because it's a job, it's a passion, it's my home. I love the museum, and I love all the strides that we've been making over the years. There isn't anything that I haven't been proud of, but I'm prouder than ever of where we're headed in the future.